what made you want to like start you have two businesses, right?
Yeah.
So did you start them at the same time or did you because they work hand in hand, right? You have your photography and then you sell also photography equipment if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So were you like, okay, these would make sense to go hand in hand? Or were you like, I did this and I see a possibility in this industry that goes along with what I'm already doing. So let me start this, a couple years down the line.
Yeah, it was somewhat like that. I mean, for the most part, like I started my media company probably like late into high school, early into college. And then from there, when it really started to grow, I think that's when I looked at starting to get into different areas, especially with different businesses. But yeah, that's pretty much like exactly it. I think it's interesting playing, doing like a service-based company, and then you do somewhat of like a retail online sale company, and it's completely different. But I think more so it's kind of almost a challenge. And you and I were talking earlier, but
Yeah.
I think it's like it's all kind of like a game. So you kind of like figure out like, well, this is working, this isn't working. Um, but yeah, I mean, they do play hand in hand. I think for the most part, like the media company mostly just services like weddings and events and stuff like that. So we don't really like sell gear or stuff like that. And I was really really comfortable in that whole industry. So I think that's kind of why that led into, one thing led to another, to start selling like other stuff like bags or straps or other camera equipment as well.
Got you. Did you go to school to do photography?
No, so initially it's funny. I started college and I went into computer engineering initially. And when I realized, like, when you start getting into like the core classes and you realize like the nitty gritty of what you're going to be doing every day, I think that's what kind of led me astray from it. And I went more into business. I mean, the classes they also kick your butt too. So
Right.
they're not really easy by any means. But besides that, I think like business really interested me, just because that's when I was like really starting to get into business. And I think when you start really growing a company, it gets really interesting just to have to like, I don't know, develop but keep growing. Because obviously you can get like stagnant, and then that's when you start to somewhat not necessarily fail, but just it's not necessarily the same as like the same feeling, with a company growing and you excelling it versus it going down and you like putting more and more into it and it's not really helping. But anyway, so yeah, I switched my major through college to business, but actually my degree is in business for information systems. So
Okay.
it's like more of an IT degree. I'm still in that like IT, like computer engineering, like
Okay.
somewhat space, but yeah. So my degree, it's like a mixture of like computer science
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with the business end. So it kind of you can manage networks and whatnot. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of where that is. So I didn't go to school for it, and I would not recommend anybody go to school for
Well, that's why
photography.
I asked because
Yeah,
I was gonna see. I'm like, people always make fun of people that go to school for photography degrees, or like, and it's
yeah,
just I was just gonna see if you did and if it was worth your while. But kind
yeah,
of relieved you didn't because it's an
yeah,
interesting thing. I feel like with a certain degree like that, you just cut yourself off from so many opportunities, right? It's so
yeah,
special. A, it's so specialized, and B, its specialization doesn't really give you applicable skills into other industries, right? Like,
correct. Yeah,
right, because they're going to teach you how to, you know, doctor your pictures, make sure you get them correctly, angles, stability. They're going to teach you probably a little more than that. I'm not an expert in the photography major, but
yeah,
at what point you can't apply that to accounting. Like you can't apply that to like, something like in that you couldn't apply that to being an engineer at a company, right?
yeah. Well, and I think that's like super interesting too because I talk with a lot of other people, like not necessarily in the industry, but just other people in general, and it like it's funny. I took a photography class when I was in college because obviously you have to like do the art credits and whatever else. But I took one when I was there and I got a B. But it's just funny. It's funny because like that's when I already had like a company that was doing well in that space.
Right.
But I think the people that do go to photography, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I think they do get too meticulous into like the art aspect, not into the aspect of how you're going to actually make money or survive. Um, and I think like for me, like there's photographers out there that are way better than I will ever be.
Yeah.
But the thing is I'm a better business person than they will ever be. So at the end of the day, I mean, you can still be a great photographer, but you have to be a better business person to be able to actually make money or make a living
Right.
off of it.
Well,
Because like obviously you can make very little money, but you can also make a ton of money in this space too.
right.
Um, it just kind of depends how good you are at, presenting yourself, marketing, building websites and integrating, new things throughout, and keep doing that too. I mean, because like obviously my stuff didn't just happen, overnight, but it's funny that I have like, I think what 3 4 years ago I started doing like online ordering for some of the contracts that I have with schools and sports teams, besides the stuff that I do with,
Yeah.
events and weddings. But in that other portion of the business where we do stuff with schools and sports, I like wanted to do online ordering, so I knew one, that's where everything's headed, right? But
Right.
then two, it's a lot easier because I can keep track, like accounting wise, what orders are filled, what are not, how much things were, what the revenues were. Like you can really keep track and then break down like where the problems are. So like, are there issues with these packages versus these ones? Why are they not buying these versus these?
Right.
Um, and it's funny because like now in 2020 obviously everything's having to go online, right?
Right.
And going into the future you're thinking like a year out, okay, well if things do get better, things throughout the year increase or you start getting more business back into how it normally was before, um, you're going to need those online ordering things already in place. So to build them now it'd be like a rush to get it done, and if you're even going to do it correctly. So it's just, I mean, yeah, innovating is like you have to stay consistent in that space, in any space really.
Right. And I think there's something you said that's really important that to touch on, and that's a lot of people have this big misconception when it comes to business and creating a business that it needs to be the top of the line. You have to be the best at what you're doing. And don't get me wrong, that's great, right? But I think there's really types of business, right? And I'm going to call them type A and type B for the sake of this. I'm sure there's a technical term for it. I don't know
Yeah.
the technical term. So like type A is like you are the best at doing this. You are the Gordon Ramsay of restaurants. You're the best at making the food, right? People come there because they know they're getting the highest quality, the best, right? And then
Mhm.
there's type B, right? Type B is going to be like your if we're going to use restaurant industry, your pubs, your Applebee's, places that provide you just a quality business, right? They provided and they put more of their time and effort into like creating an atmosphere and creating something where it's like affordable, like it's built as a more of a business and not reliant on a certain quality, right?
Mhm.
And so like I think that's huge. And I think a lot of people think they have to be the if they have to be the fastest, they have to be the best. But in reality, to have a successful business, you can either be the best or you can just outrun the slowest, right? And like you can outrun the bear, and in my opinion, is the way I put it, right? If you're all being chased by a bear, you don't have to be the fastest, you just got to outrun the bear.
Yeah. Well, and like that's really important too, like looking at markets here, because like where I'm at, I mean, obviously there's not a lot of weddings where they're tens of thousands of dollars or high almost ten
Right.
thousand dollars, in that price range. But you have to figure out, okay, I could do three of those weddings a year, and that's great and all, but they expect like something that's up here.
Right.
Or I can do these weddings that are a little bit less. They don't necessarily expect as much, but you can do 50 of them as an example. And it's like, so which one would you rather do? The 50 and you make way more money, you get your name out
Right.
there more, you have more product, or do you just strive for those eight? Not necessarily speaking that you have to not strive for the eight, you can still strive to get towards that at a certain point.
Right.
But I think this huge like thing with business is people expect, oh, like, well, I need to research or I need to do this or whatever else. But and I push like my friends to do the same thing because I talk to some of my buddies and they're like, oh, well, yeah, I looked into doing a new business and doing this or whatever. And it's like, okay, what have you done? Like what, like they're like, oh, I'm just researching and stuff like that now. And it's like, yes, that's great, but like you got to hit the ground running. Like if I never hit the ground running and just did it, there wouldn't have been, I mean, there's like doers and there's thinkers, right? So
Yeah.
there's people that are
Right.
just going to think and ponder and try to figure out how they can best do it. But by the time they figure it out, I'm already 8 steps ahead of them. So it's kind of like a catching up thing between, them and me type thing. So
Right. Sorry that the Amazon went off.
you're good.
Um, yeah, and you are. 100% correct. And I talked about it in a couple of my past podcasts. I'm a firm believer in that doing it actually comes before believing you can do it. I think a lot of the
Mhm.
battle is more of just doing it, right? It's, there's even, you can apply that to anything in life, right? If you work out, a lot of working out, the challenge isn't believing that you can do it. I can sit here and believe I can squat all day, but it's actually just going and like doing it. Like you just got to do it. You got to do it. And then from there, believe that you can do more and believe in yourself that you can keep pushing those limits. And yeah, a lot of people don't realize that you'll never be rich or have full anonymity. If that, I might have pronounced that wrong. I might have just butchered that word. Anonymity. Ugh.
I think you got it right the first time.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, unless you're willing to take that risk.
Yeah.
And so when did you take the risk? Did you start this in school? Did it take a couple years of doing a real job and you're like, oh, fuck this real job, what they consider a real job, right? A corporate job or whatever. And you're like, fuck this
Yeah.
corporate job. I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah, so it was more so in high school. So in high school, there was a photography company here that I initially worked for. They're pretty big in our state, but I started doing stuff with them in high school, and it was more like a part. Like I didn't really need to necessarily work, but it was more of like a fun thing. Like I got to practice something that I love to do, but I also learned a lot doing it too. So you learn other, you know, using studio lights versus just using flashes, stuff like that. But it gets a lot more nitty gritty than that. But you learn that type of experience. And then from there, when I was going into college, that's when it got really hard because, like, obviously working in college, it's a lot harder than people think it is. And I applaud a lot of people who do do that because it is very difficult, and especially if you have kids and you're in school and working, like, that's a lot. But
Yeah.
um, so that's when I started stepping back from working for them and just doing more stuff on my own. And a lot of it came like, building websites and, getting like some of your past work and stuff out there and then figuring out what you want to do with it. So initially, like I started doing just family photos. And you do it for friends, friends of family, friends of friends, then you start getting your name out there and it starts, you just start getting emailed from random people at that point. I mean,
Right.
that's where it kind of started. And then I realized like, well, I can start doing weddings and do and weddings are really interesting because I think people think they're very easy to do, but you have to be very good at doing a lot of different things, right? So like if you're a photographer, you can be great at taking photos of people, but of capturing like moments or like taking pictures of like specific items like the rings and stuff like that is a little bit more difficult or challenging just trying to frame those different things, right? So and then vice versa. So if you're really good at taking pictures of little small like watches or rings
Yeah.
or you're good at
Yeah.
that sort of thing and then you're not good at posing people or interacting with people or even if you have to like take charge and boss them around during the family pictures, like that's completely separate. So you do have to be better at doing different things, and I think also like capturing moments without necessarily showing that you're there, right? Because you don't want
Right.
the couple or you interrupting moments that they're having, but rather capture those moments that are happening. um,
Right, and that's huge. Right, there's something about the moment if you can capture in the picture that makes it all the more better.
yeah.
And what do you think? So weddings, I would assume, got to have some pressure, right? Those are people's special moments. Those are like,
Yeah.
do you feel that pressure every time you do one, or have you started to develop, a way to cope with it?
um, I think like I don't know, after you've done so many weddings, it starts to get to the point where it's not just another wedding, but it's in a sense another wedding to you. And although it's that couple's day, um, you're still capturing it, you're still doing all the other stuff, but you know from your past experience not to stress in certain times. And that's why I see like sometimes I'll do video or videography for a wedding where like there's a different photographer and stuff. And you'll see like some photographers act very differently than I would, or like take pictures very differently. And it's really interesting because sometimes my employees will be with me and they're like, you like it's really weird seeing somebody like interact with people during family pictures or stress during that time because you're so calm. And it's like, yes, I'm also so calm, but it's because I've done it so many times that I know that I don't need to stress over, finding that one person or whatever else. Like we can move on and come back to it. But I
Right.
think that comes with experience. So yeah, I would say it was more so that like just the experience factor. But I think
Now,
that's where that comes in. Although I go from like doing family pictures to weddings, and then that's when I got into like doing schools and sports stuff, for like sports, basketball, baseball leagues and stuff, in my city. But initially with those, I mean, those were stressful because although I had done it before and I knew like what to do and what not to do, it was still stressful because I wasn't used to doing that so often. And then I think after a while, you get so used to it, it becomes more of like a template. Like, this and this might happen, um, throughout that whole time, but you're trying to get from A to Z, right? And it might not be a
Right.
straight line, it might be a squiggly line, but you know that ultimately you need to get from like one place to another. Um,
Right.
so
Now, do you believe in marriage? Do you think marriage is an important thing like it used to be back in the 50s? Or you think that mindset of importance and what its actual meaning has kind of deterred over time? Because, and why I ask this is me and my friend always talk about it, right? I think a lot of people are starting to develop relationships where like going through the process of marriage isn't a necessity anymore, right? It used to be you have to get married,
mhm.
you need to find somebody. And like that's becoming, in my opinion, less of a necessity because you can do all those things without having to be in a what is essentially a binded contract with someone.
Mhm.
It's just sense of ownership over somebody. I just kind of wondering, since you do so many of them, what's your opinion on them?
So I say yes, but I say it's more so of, like, to me, I think, a lot of people want, or a lot of couples want like huge weddings, right? And I don't necessarily think like for me personally, it would be about a huge wedding. Like for me, I tell my employees and like my friends and stuff like that, it's funny, but I tell them like I would never have a big wedding in like my city or like with like a ton of family, ton of friends, whatever else. Like that's not me. I'd rather prefer like both immediate families and like me and her go fly out to, let's just say, Italy and rent an Airbnb, which really isn't as expensive as you think it is. I priced it out while I was at weddings. So you think about how much weddings cost, and then you realize like, oh, I could spend like a quarter of that, and all of us go fly somewhere and stay at an Airbnb for a week, right? And you have that like special time with that person and like that family interaction. And I think like that's more important in the sense that it should be about you two, not necessarily about like the marriage and kids, whatever else. Sometimes those come out of order, but I think it is somewhat healthy to be in a marriage because you know that that is, it could be a binding contract, but it can be a binding contract that you can always come back to and have as like a backbone, kind of, because you are married. There isn't like a walking away from it type of thing. And I think
Right.
that's where like in our society now is a lot different than it was back in the day, right? Because you mentioned like, back in the 50s, whatever else, you had to get married, then you had kids, and then you had whatever. Nowadays, you might have a kid before and get married later, which happens quite often. And people still get married, but I think it's healthy for those people to still get married because then at the end of the day, that's what they come back to. Um, Versus, just, saying, okay, well, I want to walk away now because that shouldn't really be an option if if you do really want to be
Right.
with that other person. Um, so,
Well, and I think another thing is people go to get married too young. I think like people try to, a lot of people don't really invest the time into like, you know, let's spend years, let's really see what this is like, let's live together. There's people I know, there's two people I know that just got engaged and they had never lived with each
yeah,
other.
that's an
I'm just
important
like, you
thing.
can't like that.
Yeah.
Right, right. Like that's a truly important thing. So like I think a lot of people do jump into them early. Now, the other half of your business, you sell equipment and you sell you told me, if I remember correctly, you sell to the government, correct?
Sorry,
Did
you
did you
you
tell
cut
me
out for
that?
just a second. What was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you tell me you sold to the government your
Yeah, so one of
equipment?
the one of the companies I help run, we sell like equipment to government entities. So yeah, there's labs and stuff out here that we sell, either camera equipment to, like paper supplies, a lot of stuff. It can be in the realm of cameras, but sometimes not necessarily. It could be in electronic spaces too. But for the most part, I would say it's usually like cameras, lenses, stuff like that, that they use. But yes, that's one of the parts.
Is that interesting to do? Do you find I guess real and like my curiosity, does the government act differently as a client than anyone else would, or is it very much ran business oriented and just like, hey, let's get this done?
Um, I think it's easier and harder. There's a lot of like red tape that you might have to cut through versus doing it through like a private company. Because obviously, if let's just say, I don't know, Apple wants to order whatever from us, it's a lot different because it's easy. It's just like, okay, you want to order this many, this is how much it costs, this is what the invoice is, this is it. Versus, when you work with government stuff, it's this is how much it costs, this is how much it costs us, this is how, you can only make so much on like a profit margin with them. And like this is the turnaround time, and it's a lot more nitty gritty, I would say, than working with private sector, um, you know, places. So it's interesting to see the difference, but I would say it's just, part of working with the government. It's just a lot of red tape sometimes, or getting stuff approval, or having stuff for approval, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And yeah, I guess you answered my question. Probably how I expected.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask you is, do you find yourself, a lot of people want to run businesses who have more freedom, but when you start that business and when you're running it, how much freedom would you actually say you have?
So that's actually really interesting that you asked me that. So in college, I always say when I look back, like I wish I had more of a college experience, right? And although you can be like in fraternities or in like other organizations and groups and stuff like that within college, which I did, but with that being said, I think when you have a business, like that's your baby, right? So that's what you're working on all the time. You're doing homework, you're doing also business stuff. You're trying to fix stuff, you're trying to make it better or whatever else. Um, and I think I spent a lot of time in college doing that, which might have pushed me away from having. Not that I didn't have a college experience, so don't take it that way. It's not that I
Yeah, yeah,
didn't.
yeah.
It was just that I think you look at people in college and you look at what other people were doing while I was doing all that stuff, and that's kind of like the give and take, right? Like I was working on that all that stuff, so now I can travel whenever I want. I can go wherever I want, anytime I want to. Obviously, besides this year, but
Yeah,
for the most part, I mean, you can do whatever you want. And you have that flexibility both with time and monetarily. So it's like a give or take thing. It's like yes, I could have had more of a like college experience, I guess, and you could have had more friends and went to more parties or whatever else, and then enjoyed that portion more before you graduated. But at the same time, I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't do that then. So yes, you do have, once you start to get to a certain point in business, yes, you do have more flexibility and more time, but people forget that you were grinding, right, all that time out when you're not going to friends' houses, not going to parties, not going to hang out with that person or this person, and instead you're working on all that stuff back at home or wherever it might be. Um, and I think it goes to along the same point that like people might follow me on Instagram now and they might see that I'm traveling or I'm at this place or that place or whatever, and they're like, oh, that must be so nice because he can do all these things. And it's like, yes, I might be in Paris, but you don't see me just having to stay up till 3 a.m. there because I have a phone call back home at whatever time because I have to be on. Like if I'm not on that phone call, nobody else will be. So it's either I still am grinding it out wherever I am. It's just people don't realize how much work it actually takes, to do that or run that business.
right. And I think it is life is almost a game of choices, right? Like you have to like, you gave up some of what a lot of people, you still had a college experience, but you gave up probably like a greater college experience to be able to have the abilities that you have now, right? And to be able to have your freedom that you have now. At the end of the day, like it's about sacrifices. I think sacrifices one is a big thing that people don't realize when trying to get something going or when thinking about doing something. You always have to think, what is your cost and what is your loss, right? Like what am I losing by doing this? And cost doesn't always necessarily have to be monetarily, right? What is the cost of my time doing this, right? So like Man Meets Modern, I do it after, I work 40, 50 hours a week, and I do it after I do my job, right? Because I don't, I can't survive off of Man Meets Modern right now. And what is my cost for that, right? I don't always get to work out anymore. I used to work out 7 days a week, did it for like 3 years, like super in shape. And I'm not I would say out of shape. I think COVID. I'm probably like everyone else, probably gained like a COVID 15, like majority of people.
Yeah.
But what's my cost in that? There are some nights I don't get to work out. There are some nights I don't get to hang out. I had friends that invited me over and I missed the complete pregame to go to a bar because I was doing a podcast and that podcast went 3 hours, right? And I need that though, right? I had to sacrifice that to try and get to where I'm going.
Mhm. Yeah, no, and I mean, opportunity cost is everything, but yeah, I think the sacrifice of doing all that stuff is really important because like you do have to realize that when you do any sort of like not extracurricular, but like
Yeah,
extra stuff on top of what you're already doing. Whether even if it is working out, because honestly, if you think about working out the same way, let's just say you like go on like a cycling class. Let's just say I don't know 3 times a week, right? Well, those 3 times a week, if you're really good about doing that, you might be somewhat fit, right? Because it's only three
right.
times a week, so it's not a ton. But if you're doing that time you're missing from doing other things. So is that because let's just say you work a 9 to 5 job, if you're doing it right after work, are you missing dinner with with your partner? Are you missing, I don't know, a movie? Are you missing, I don't know, whatever, beers with the guys after work? Like you're
Right,
missing those things in order to chase you being fit. And I think it goes to the same thing with business stuff. Like, yes, you might be, you know, sitting there and, in the dark hours of the night,
right,
editing stuff or whatever else. And people don't see that because they think, oh, well, he's doing a podcast and you do a podcast and just come over after or whatever. But
right,
sometimes it's not necessarily that easy. And even like some of my friends, we have like a group chat where we play Call of Duty together
right.
sometimes. But sometimes they'll be like, oh, we'll jump on. I'm like, oh, I got this or I got this. And they're like, oh, what's taking you so long? I'm like, you don't understand. Answering emails isn't just answering emails. Like you got to answer emails and you got to figure out like if there's a problem with an order or whatever else. Like it gets more complicated than that.
Right. Sometimes
Um,
answering that email is like diving into an hour's worth of shit to figure out what the problem is so you can respond to that email.
yeah, exactly. But it's like it gets to a point where like, do you want to go play Call of Duty for an hour and a half, or do you want to make a couple $1,000s? I mean, like what's the
What do
what,
you want?
what yeah, and
Yeah.
the thing is if you don't do those, like yes, you might have to do it later. So yes, you might go play Call of Duty for a few hours, but then that means now you're staying up instead of till 11 o'clock, now you're staying up till 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's sacrifices everywhere, but I think that's just important to kind of understand before you even get that deep into something.
What do you think motivates you when you make those types of sacrifices, right? What motivates you that you didn't go get the beers with the guys? What motivates you to not go to that college party you wanted to go to? Was it strictly that you had to get something done? Was it for the money? Was it for the freedom? Was it because you love what you're doing? What drives you?
Um, so I think a lot of it is, well, initially I would say like, yes, it's monetary. I think everything initially when you start stuff, you want it to get to a certain point of success. But after that point, I think it becomes less about the money and more about what you've grown. So for example, you might not care about making necessarily as much, but you might care that your companies or whatever are doing um, this or that, as an example. And like, late into last year, I started looking at starting a bag company, like a separate bag line that sells bags and camera straps. That's separate from everything else I'm doing. And it's really interesting because especially like this year and during COVID, like I'm starting to sell, I don't know, like I think the last couple of like month or two, we are doing like 2,000 in sales a month, which I literally started as a pet project. But I think that the motivation to see it grow is more satisfying to me than the money necessarily, because it helps me become a better person, right? So now I'm dealing with like different suppliers in China and the US and whatever else, trying to source these like products.
Yeah.
And then you get them there. And then when you do that, you're like, wow, I worked all this time to figure out what products I can get to build this one thing. And now this one thing people actually want.
Right.
And I think that alone, and then when people review it and like it, and you're starting to get like other YouTubers to like start reviewing your bags and like that's in the works, I think that's really satisfying to me because you're seeing something grow that you started yourself.
Right.
Um, so that's part of it that I want to keep seeing grow because when you don't work on those things, obviously they stop. That I would say is one. Obviously, monetarily, that's always something that is on people's minds. So that's another one. Um, but also I think like the freedom, because I think we had talked, earlier about like traveling and stuff like that, and it's late until 2019. So actually, it's funny because tomorrow, a year ago, so on the 10th of December, a year ago, I took my mom to Bali, and we went over there for a week and a half. And that's like the first time I had off, like completely like cut off some work stuff. And yes, I still work when I'm out there, but not nearly as much as obviously I do here.
Right.
Um, but I think when I was at the hotel, there's one day where I planned like nothing to do. So like some days we go on hikes or we did like a cooking class, or whatever, because I don't know, you're with your mom trying to find
Right.
stuff to do. So um, one of the days I didn't plan anything. So like you're hanging out by the pool and stuff like that. And I think I had like a realization there that like I'm just hanging out by the pool and I have absolutely nothing to do. Like there's nothing on my mind. There's nothing. And it with that like was so satisfying too. But I would have never gotten that and never been in that spot in that hotel, been able to like be on those flights if I never grinded out, in college, in after college, and like throughout all that stuff, that you give all that stuff up to have these like really unique experiences, that not a lot of people get to have. So I think that is kind of also a trade-off that I can look forward to also. So I mean, there's multiple things.
Definitely. Now, when you started, did you so there's two things that I kind of toy with in my head. And I think a lot of people have a belief that it takes money to make money. And I think that's partly true, right? You definitely need, like, the more money you have, the more money you can make. It's simple opportunity, right?
Yeah.
You can afford to do more. But how much of it do you think is more due to being able to just time when you invest properly? And because, like,
So
why I say that is, with I'm not rich or anything, but I think what's helping me be successful is that when I've invested, I've timed it at the right points, that it gave me the boost I needed. It gave me the return I needed it at that moment.
yeah, so I think with some things, it's more important than others. So, like for example, the photography stuff. Like I already had a camera which was decent at the time, when I initially started doing, my like actual company stuff by myself. Um, but I think I started it, and I probably started it with like $1,000, right? Because at the time, I mean, you're starting out, you're in high school or college, like $1,000 is a lot more than $1,000 is in today, like in my mind now, I guess.
Yeah.
But I started with that, and now you have that $1,000 that now yearly makes you over $100,000. So, I mean, and that's just one company, and then you have other stuff too. But it plays off on putting it into investments. I would say like if you're doing real estate or like investing in the stock market, that plays a lot more into you need money to make money and you need to time it right. Because like obviously right now, like me investing money into the stock market now, it's funny because I have another group with my friends that we like
Yeah.
talk about it every day. But I mean, we're making a killing now. But the thing is, we have money to spend on that stuff, and if you didn't time it now, that everything kind of crashed a little bit and is starting to somewhat come back up with vaccine talks and the
Yeah.
stimulus talks and stuff like that. If you weren't timing it right there, you would have missed the boat. I mean, you could have invested $20,000 and lost half of it or more than half of it, just what 6 months ago maybe.
Right.
So that plays a lot more. But I think if you're, especially if you're starting like new business stuff, no matter what you're doing, especially if it's service based, you don't need to like have a ton of money to do it. It's more so you need to have the drive and motivation every single day to keep doing it, even on those days you don't want to. Because those days you don't want to, you have to think there is somebody else out there that is doing it today. So if you're not doing it today, that other person is doing it and is grinding out that time frame and
Right.
that, putting their energy into that when you're not. And if that's the case, they're going to they're going to do a lot better than you are just because of that sole fact. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think it does kind of play into that.
Yeah.
And like, even with the bag stuff, because I talked about that, I think you probably saw it on my website, but even with that bag stuff that I started now, I mean, like I'm selling tons of those now. And I think, yes, it has to do with partially everybody ordering online and whatnot too. But if I didn't have the experience that I do with like SEO and, doing website marketing and stuff like that, having that backbone does help, but it plays along with like I'm still grinding it out. I didn't start that company with a lot of money either. I mean, it's all relative, right? I mean, I didn't blow tens of thousands of dollars on starting it, right? But I'm putting in the time and effort that I know it needs to have in order for it to be successful. So yeah,
Definitely,
I think
man. You fucking just lay down quote of the day. If you're not doing it today, someone else is, right? That's
yeah.
that. That is huge, though. A lot of people don't understand. Any great athlete, any person that's been great at something, has
Mhm,
had, whether it was put in those words, has had that mentality, right? Well, if I'm not, practicing X amount of hours today, someone else is, right? If I'm not, Kobe would stand in the gym and people would come and go in the time that he was still in the gym, right? Like making
mhm.
shots and stuff like that. So that's huge. And I'm glad that you said that because I think it's very important for people to grasp that concept.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, do you do on the stock market? Do you trade? Are you a share buyer? Or are you like do you buy contracts for options? What is your what are you and the
So
buddies up to?
everybody, some of the guys do different things. I don't do options because I think it's just really complicated, a lot more than I'm willing to give it the energy of, just because I have everything
Yeah,
else. But usually, I mean, I have like retirement accounts. So I have like 401ks,
yeah,
Roths, and stuff like that that I don't really touch. Like those just sit there. But then like I have a brokerage account that I just mess around with. So a lot of the stuff like right now, I bought a lot of oil and stuff when it crashed, and I bought what else do I have? I don't know. I have um, like some biotech companies too. Um,
biotech's huge.
and yeah, so I mean, it's just things that, and also, I mean, like airline industries and cruise line industries. I mean, that stuff that crashed most likely will like rebound at least enough to make money on it. So I mean, it's more so about timing that. So I just do like individual stocks with those. Um, and some of my friends do options, but I mean, the options are super complicated at
Options.
times. So, well, and they explain it to me. It sounds very simple, but when I look at how they're doing it, it looks very complicated. And it's probably
Yeah.
one of those things. It's like craps, right? I don't know if you ever gamble, but
No,
it's like
100%. It
craps.
is a
If you
gamble.
go look at the table, you're like, holy crap! There's so many things going on, right?
Yeah.
But once you understand how to play, it's very easy. And it's probably like that. It's just I haven't really played, or I
Yeah.
haven't really traded options. So
Options legit, like it could be in a casino. The only difference is like you don't lose all your money on an option, right? You can
yeah,
lose a fat chunk of it, but you won't lose all of it. You'll always be able to sell stocks for something, right? So like
yeah,
that's like the backbone. But yeah, it 100%. You might as well be rolling the dice. It is very easy to do, right? But you're making it's easy to do. It's not easy to be good at it. Because to be good at it, I do it and I mess around with it in my free time through my day. And
hmm,
like I don't build charts though. I don't chart. I don't look at candles all the time. Like I'm more or less just looking at the numbers, seeing how they move around. I'm in a group that helps guide me a little bit. But I'm doing it just to see if I can get a feel for it. But those that do put the time in get the reward out of it, right?
yeah,
There's I don't know if you knew this. David Blaine talked about how he knew a guy because he since used craps who built a craps table in his basement and would sit there and just roll dice 10 hours a day for years and eventually got to the point where if he went into a casino, he could roll a dice and make them land on whatever numbers he wanted them to land on. He did it at like 5 casinos. One is like $10 million or whatever, and then dropped off the face of the earth.
that's crazy. That's
Right?
super cool though. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think like that whole sometimes I think when you, especially with day trading too, like that is practically like gambling. I mean, unless you're gonna like lose and then just hold it off until it kind of gains back again. But yeah, I mean, I think that's like also kind of a thrill now that like obviously the virus is on too. I mean, it's something
Right.
that can occupy your time if you have nothing better to do.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't think I looked at the stock market as much, even though I had retirement accounts and stuff like that. Like I put them into funds, but I never necessarily like really dug down into like specific companies and looked at like what their stuff is. Because there are a few that one of my friends was like, good luck with that. And
Yeah.
like now I'm up, I think like 180% right now in
Yeah.
just that one company. And it's like,
Feels
I
so good,
told
doesn't
you
it?
back, I don't know how long ago to invest in them, but now I'm just writing it out because it should be going a heck of a lot more too. It's just like the start now that the virus is starting to somewhat hopefully come to a close. But
Haters are your greatest motivators, man. Like they really are. I think I remember my podcast with comedian Freddie G, and he talked about how he goes, if people are hating on you for it, you probably did something right. And like
Yeah,
when yours is for the stocks, and like maybe he was just, he's probably just trying to help you out, but you end up doing something right.
yeah. And although I mean, like you can lose lose stuff too. I've lost on
Yeah.
some too, but I mean, it's just knowing when to kind of cut your losses.
So
But
I'm gonna get freaky deaky on you since you're in New Mexico.
mhm,
Roswell is there.
yes.
Where we stand on the aliens?
Um, okay, so I don't know if necessarily the Roswell thing necessary. I mean, there's a lot of I've watched like documentaries and stuff on
Yeah.
it. I think something could have happened, but like all the pictures and stuff that they show, I don't think necessarily show anything. Um, but I think there's also a lot of other things that have happened, like in New Mexico, that people talk about and stuff like that. So I think ultimately speaking, at the end of the day, whether or not there are aliens in general, for somebody to say that there's not, and realize how big our universe is, that there's not one species that lives is insane. Whether it's an ant, I don't care, like an ant or something.
Something.
If there is something out there, there has to be something in that all that like space that has to be there. That's not just us. So for us to think that we're the only ones is very arrogant, I think.
Even if you
Uh,
find something simple like an ant, right? That's a multicellular organism. Like,
yeah,
what's to say like there's not more multicellular organisms that are as complex as us? And one of the only reasons why I asked is because today is December 9th, because this will release tomorrow. But
mhm.
I've been seeing CNBC released something about uh, an ex-Israeli space commander or whatever said that there are like actual aliens. They even said that Trump knows that there's actual aliens, which is interesting. It makes sense, right? If someone's going to know, probably the United States president and every other world leader would
Yeah.
know about aliens. But I thought it'd be an interesting question to kind of throw at you and see what you say. Being in probably what Arizona, it's got to be one of the top three states for alien activity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Some things, and especially because people release stuff like nowadays, and everybody has a phone, so they can video stuff or whatever else. I think it's gonna be harder and harder if anybody is covering stuff up for it to continue. Because like at some point, I mean, you can't. For example, like I have cameras all over the house. I mean, if something were to happen at the house, it would be on one of them. You know what I mean? So
Right.
imagine that just on a wider scale for the population of just people having their phones and stuff like that. And honestly, phone cameras these days aren't bad either. I mean, you can get good quality stuff out of them. So if something were to happen, it's very easy for people to, take pictures and stuff like
Do you
that.
think someone could start doing photography with their phone? You think it's almost easier to start doing something like that now?
With your phone, I mean, so like if we're getting technical a little bit,
Yeah. Okay. Get crazy.
one, I don't think it'd be respected as much by people. Like people will not be paying you large sums of money. Like they're not going to pay you three or
Just
four
love
thousand, 5,000 for a wedding to take pictures with your phone that they could do, right? Um, but I think it's a lot easier for people to do like videos and YouTube these days with the phone because nobody really knows or can like know any different. Um, and especially with the new iPhones too. I mean, with the like portrait mode, it's pretty good. But it's funny because I can always tell if people took it with portrait mode because you can like zoom in on their hairline like right here. And
Yeah.
if it's like blurry a little bit on their hair, you know it's like not a real camera because like obviously a real camera wouldn't do that. Um, so I think like to take pictures, maybe if you're gonna like sell them online or like take pictures of landscapes, maybe yeah, but the quality is there. It's just not as good as if you're really gonna get into it. Because like if you're really gonna get into it, yes, it might have the megapixels or whatever else, but when you go to actually edit the files, it's not the same. And even for that aspect, having a Sony camera because I used to have one for traveling,
Yeah.
and I have Canons that I use for like work and business stuff. But even switching between those two, like I love my Sony camera, but editing them was such a pain in the butt because the like color preferences and stuff are just a little bit different. Even in the raw formats, like when you shoot them in like a raw file,
Yeah.
it is still different. So when you go to edit them, they don't edit the same. So I might have all these presets that I use on all my other cameras because I know this affects the picture as such. but when you go and use like a Sony camera, it doesn't do the same thing. So I think people can get into photography and stuff, doing landscapes and whatnot, and they can have really good Instagram photos for like that, for that matter. But as far as like doing it professionally right now, I don't think it's there just yet. Nor will it ever necessarily be. I think it could there could be really good quality in your phone, but to have like a dedicated product that just does that one thing will probably always be a little bit better than something that plays music, searches the internet, downloads all kinds of stuff too. Um, so I mean, it just and also I mean, you look at cameras. My cameras are like this big with a small lens on it, and like bigger if it has bigger lenses.
Yeah.
And like that glass is such a high quality glass that you can't really compare my camera. That will and my cameras also cost upwards of 5,000. So you can't compare that to an iPhone because like if you look at the pictures next to each other, they don't even look the same. Um, so I mean,
Damn, Apple.
I know Tim Cook's gonna call me tomorrow, right? But no, I mean, for the majority of consumers, to have like good Instagram photos or Facebook photos, that's pretty much what they care about more so. And even if it looks similar, I think that's what they want versus, having professional photos for every single thing.
Well, and what do you think about that? Because I think uh, one thing that I stopped doing once I graduated college is I no longer really post pictures to show
Hmm.
off anymore. And a lot of people do, right? That's a lot of the culture today is
Yeah.
to show off, right? Like, hey, look at me. It's always a hey,
Yeah.
look at me. Everyone's getting really selfish with it. Hey, look at me. And I reverted back to trying to just use it for its original purpose, right? Like when I post an Instagram picture, a lot of my last pictures, well, actually, my very last one is a picture of me and my girlfriend, but a lot of the ones before that, it's just like, hey, I'm hanging out in this cool park in San Francisco. Hey, like I got this cool video of nature stuff that I saw, right? Or hey, I got this cool ass drink at a bar. Like that's what I use it for, and that's originally what it was meant for, right? The memory, right? To capture the memory. Do you think it's almost becoming a problem that a lot of people no longer give a shit about the memory? They more just like are, I want to do it to show other people this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think it somewhat depends who you are and also like your friend culture too. Because I think like my like tight group of friends that I have here, like we don't really care about, like nobody's really caring about like what one person is doing more successful than the other. It's more of us just like caring about each other. And I think I kind of apply that to posting on like Instagram and stuff like that. I never post on Facebook, but like even just posting on Instagram, I'll post stuff from my trips and it's not necessarily to show off, but like it's nice to go back in time, like when I look at it and you can see like, oh, I don't know, like however many years ago, like that was that one first time I went to Japan, for example. And then you look back and you like it just is like a memory of like and captures like that time period of what you were doing then. So I think it depends how people look at it. And also when I post stuff, like I don't do hashtags or anything like that. So
Yeah,
I don't really care. Like my profiles, well, my personal one is private. So like really it's just the people that I follow or follow me or whatever that I had
right.
already like known before or whatnot. Um, so really it's just, posting it, but it's more so for me when I look at it. But I think culturally and, as a society, it has become very much of like who you are, what you're doing better than the other people. um, and it's funny because like we're talking about traveling and stuff like that, and I was telling you like that I get upgraded and stuff for free, but it's funny to see like the people that you can tell don't get that, or like they might have paid for that one ticket to go from wherever to wherever and first. um, and they might be like posting pictures the whole time and whatever, and to each their own. I mean, if you want to
Yeah,
do it, but it's just funny to see like that one person who's probably doing that, I don't know, 1% of the time, when I'm getting that same thing for free, never paying for it, but I'm just flying so much that I'm getting that perk kind of, and
yeah.
I'm always sitting there and I mean I might post like a thing on my story, but it's usually like out the window or something. You're not going to really see like the first class lifestyle or
Right.
whatever else that they're trying to like get that image, I guess.
Right. And I think for anyone listening, the limit should be two. You can take one picture because, it's cool, right? You're for a lot of people it is cool. You're flying like first class. And I'm saying this for anything that you're trying to show off with. Okay, you got to ride in the Corvette today. Cool.
Yeah.
Fucking take that picture. Maybe take another one of like out the window or like you driving or something. and be done with it. I don't need to see 15 pictures on your story of you in front of the car, on the side of the car,
Yeah,
laying
exactly.
across the car. Like, no one gives a shit. Yeah, to
Yeah.
be honest, no one does. Like, there's at a
Well,
certain point, it's just become like, all right, cool. I'm gonna go about my day. You enjoy that, you know?
it's funny too because and especially like I think when you first like get success, you do want to like somewhat fit into that like scenario of like what
Right.
success is, like having a nice watch or whatever else. And I think what I've and everybody goes through that phase. So I went through that phase. Other people that are successful go through the same phase, no matter how old they are. But it's interesting because the more you're there, the more you realize nobody else does give a shit. And it's funny that you say that because I told you like my friends and I we went to Miami a little while ago, and when we were there, one of my friends and I were talking about it. But it's like when I first like started doing going into like the lounges and stuff like that I can get into, I used to think like, oh, like you have to like somewhat dress like somewhat nice and whatever else. And it's funny because the wealthiest people in those places dress like crap, don't give a crap, and just do whatever they're doing. And it's funny because like now I'll go in wearing sweats. I mean, I might still be wearing like a nice watch, but I'll be going in looking like a slum, like just wearing sweats, whatever else, like because I don't really care. Because like I know the other people there don't really care because they're too busy doing their own thing that they're not worried about what I'm looking like or whatever else. You know what I mean? So I think you have to realize that. And that's kind of like I mean, if you look at people in New York, like people in New York are so busy doing their own thing, they really don't give a shit about anybody else,
Right.
right? Um, and I think that's kind of the way you got to like view things is instead of working on like your image or what you look like, you just got to do whatever you're happy with or whatever you're
Right.
comfortable with, and just not really care as much. And that kind of goes back to business stuff, right? Because I mean, if you're comfortable and you know that you care so much about starting something or you want to start something, just do it and keep grinding it until, and it might not get to the one place you might be overnight, but it's a work in progress, right?
Right.
And if you're not caring about people giving you a hard time about missing beers with your buddies or not playing Call of Duty or,
Right.
missing that date that you could have gone on that date with a girl or guy or whatever you're into,
Right.
if you're not, if you don't care about that stuff, you'll end up being better off at the end of the day, right? Because it doesn't matter what other people think.
I mean, yeah,
Go.
and you're 100% correct. I think like uh to your point, you know, the richest people, I'm gonna equate it to sports analogy. So let's think like Tom Brady's the most winningest quarterback, right? I'm not a huge Patriots fan, but he is the most like won the most Super Bowls, right?
Mhm.
How often do you see him wear all was it 6 rings?
Mhm.
Never, right? He may wear one. He may not even wear one anymore, right? But everyone
Mhm.
that wins that, gets that taste of victory or gets that taste of a little bit of the rich right life, right? Flaunts it to the end, right? We'll always have that one Super Bowl ring on. We'll always have that one nice suit on that they got. We'll always, be trying to figure out a way to flaunt it. So I think it's a very interesting perspective that you said. Once you kind of start staying around that what you define as successful area of your life, you stop caring a lot less about how other people perceive you, right? Because internally at that point, like I'm here. I don't need you to approve of my sweatpants in the club, right? I don't care. I'm here because like, and well, you're trying to approve of my sweatpants. I just ran up $400 in drinks, and you're struggling. You're complaining that the vodka Red Bull costs $16, right? Like
Yeah.
that's how it is. Now, one thing I want to ask you is, you talk a lot about reaching that point of success and feeling that internally. When do you think that point was that you were like truly define yourself as, hey, I am a successful person?
Um, I don't know. So I think there's like different levels, right? I think like when you start to get to a point where you're, that's actually a really good question. So
Go ahead, take your time.
I would say like there was a point a couple years ago, and I was in I think Europe for like 3 or 4 months, right? And I was flying back and forth from the U.S. to Europe, but I was out just visiting the areas, and I think I'd already had some success before, but I never really like felt successful until like I hit a certain point in revenue while I was out there and not even home. And I think that's where I felt like I'm successful to the point where I can do pretty much whatever I want to do and not be tied down to doing, to being in a certain place for a certain amount of time and only being able to do certain things. And I think that's somewhat where I kind of got to that point. And I even told you, last year when I was in Bali, that was 1.2. Because I mean, we went to like Bali and Hong Kong and some places in Asia, but when you're there, I mean, you can stand on top of a building and realize like I got here because of what I've done, but it makes you want more, I think. And it's not, and like I had said, it's not necessarily about the money, but more so about like what you're capable of.
Right.
Um, and so that's, that can kind of correlate to when I started like the bag stuff too, or selling bags and straps and
Right.
like other camera accessories. But when I was doing that, you do that, I was looking more so like, well, can I do it? Like I've done this and I've done that, but like, can I do this other area that's just 100% solely online? Because it's different. I mean, everything's different, right? And you have to adjust to things, but I think it develops you more as a person. Um, and I don't know, it just helps you become, I think, better overall.
Well,
So I think that's like that defining moments when I just figured out, like I can be wherever I want and still be successful and
yeah.
not be tied down to stuff. I think so. I would say success mostly wasn't about the money at that point. It was more about the freedom. Um, I think, yeah.
Good answer. That's a great way to put it. I like that you talk about how what you're doing now is more about what can you do and challenging yourself than it is about the money, right? I think a lot of people, so like I've talked about before, I don't know if I necessarily agree that like say like Bezos has $200 billion. I think it's a little absurd. Like it is.
Yeah.
But I can understand the virtue of pushing your limits. Like I've gotten further than anyone else has gotten, right? I'm starting to get to where no one really treads anymore, right? I'm getting to that deep part of the water that not a lot of people go to. How much deeper can I go? How much more can I do? How much longer can I go for? And I think that's very important to realize as a person. I think you put it right, man. Like I don't think money necessarily defines your success and it doesn't define your happiness, right? It definitely can aid in it. It can aid in what
Mhm.
you consider yourself as successful and it can aid in your happiness. But I think at the end of the day, your success and your happiness comes from that freedom and that feeling of like I have the power to do whatever I want and I can, right? As kids, we're taught you can do whatever you want. And as adults, I think you slowly start forgetting about that, right? You're like, okay, well, I can only do this much. And I think really almost like becoming a kid again and being able to develop that belief in yourself again defines a true point of success and happiness.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's just I think interesting because so many people have so many different perspectives on that whole like ideology, and it definitely depends because I think people who are like a little bit more self-made, not necessarily just got a high-paying job, but like actually grew that money themselves, act a lot different than people who don't. Um, just because they have that like past behind them where they like know what it took to kind of get there, and can appreciate that more. But yeah, I definitely agree.
Definitely. Hey, what's the craziest thing you've ever done that you are
Craziest
willing to
thing?
share? Yeah.
Um, well, I'd say okay, crazy for me. Um, I don't know. So last year I was in Hawaii, but when I was there, I hate heights. And it's not that I hate heights, like if you're in a plane or like in a hot air balloon or something like that, looking out, like that doesn't really, like, I don't know, worry me as much or give me
Yeah.
like, sweaty hands, you get nervous and stuff like that. But I went skydiving when I was there. And I think it kind of goes to the same point that we are talking about before, but it was to the thing, it was for me like a point of, I've done all this stuff, but if I don't live life, like, I don't know, are you really living life anymore? So that's when I went skydiving. But I went skydiving. And that, like, for me was a lot because I absolutely hate heights. And like the best, I don't know if you've been skydiving, but the best way to describe it is like when you go on a roller coaster and it like drops, imagine that feeling, but like accelerate also. And I don't know, it's just, I think to me, that was like somewhat crazy of a
For sure.
thing
Well,
that I
they
did.
say they say they recommend for people that are scared of heights to do it, right? And to scared of like death to do it because you really
Yeah.
find out, right? At that point, all the cards have been dealt. What's going to happen is going to happen, right? That parachute's going to open or it's not going to open. So you really have to figure out how do you want to go out in your life.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Like, I mean, you could wait until you're older to do like, for example, like most people, wait till they're older to travel or to do, all these things that because they couldn't do when they're younger. But like
Yeah.
if you don't take that risk and do those things when you're younger, like you don't know how long you're necessarily going to be here. Um, but yeah, I would say that. I mean, that I was also in Europe, like I said, for like 3 or 4 months. That was pretty crazy because it's very weird not being home for a long
Yeah.
time. um, that, what else? I mean, I've been all kinds of places, so I'd say majority of it would be just traveling a lot. But I think even last year, like I as flying as much as I did, I think that was like absolutely mind blowing because like when you fly over 100,000 miles a year, 100,000 miles flying around the globe, like what, 4 times I think.
Yeah.
So it's like insane to think that you flew that much just flying, wherever, which it might not seem a lot, but that's a lot of flights in a year. So I think that's probably one of the more crazy things.
I mean, yeah. I mean, put that in hours, right? Like a flight from Detroit to Hong Kong or to like Thailand or whatever. It's like 19 hours or something insane.
Yeah. So
8
like I know
hours.
when I went to Bali, I left out of Albuquerque, which is in New Mexico, but I went from Albuquerque to Bali, and Jakarta is where we flew into. But I think that took like 31 hours or something like that. Was it like the total travel time from like door to door, which is it is a long flight.
Right. So you did that 4 times worth of hours, right? Or roughly probably a little bit more, give or take.
Probably more than that. I don't even really know. I think it was like 100 and something flights last year, which is a lot. But I don't know like the average. I wish it like sent you a breakdown because that would
Yeah.
actually be kind of cool to see. Um, but yeah, I know there's like apps online that you can like type in all your
Yeah.
flights and stuff like that. And it's funny because I have a box. It's like an old like champagne box, but I have it filled with like airplane tickets. I'm trying to figure out something to do. So if like any of your viewers or if you have an idea of what I should do with them, let me know. But yeah, I have a ton of like plane tickets. And I'm like, I want to like do a poster or something, but I just don't know like what I could do with them to like make a like pet project in quarantine. But yeah.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I was just trying to put in perspective like people that hate 3 hour flights. In retrospect, you've done 150 to 200 hours of flying. So like, think of that.
Well,
You know,
yeah,
like
probably. Yeah,
that's an
that's
insane,
probably a lot. Yeah.
insane concept. Hey, man, I appreciate you so much coming on the cast. Where can people find you?
You can follow me, on Instagram or on, well, probably Instagram is probably the best, but yeah, my private accounts, it's CCOBOS31. So if you want to follow me there, I'll accept it there. But other than that, if you just Google my name, calebcobos.com, and you can go through all my business stuff too there. My contact info is on there as well.
Nice. Yeah, I'll add a link in the description so people you want to go check out businesses, maybe get camera accessories, bags now. Go ahead and it'll be in the description. But hey, man, I appreciate it a lot. You killed it. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's a great fucking day.